Hey everyone. So I think we'll wait for a couple of more minutes. If you have any kind of burning questions that you want to ask that you want me to maybe cover later, you can ask in the chat if you like. So what's on the midterm aid sheet? There's not yeah, so that's actually a good question. So I actually was not planning to give an aid sheet, but that's not a bad idea. So I will post it tonight. But like in general, yeah, sorry. So I wasn't actually, I forgot that I had one last year and I wasn't actually planning to have one. But like whatever, like stuff like, like the formatting of printf, stuff like that. So given that I haven't finalized it, if you have specific requests about what you want to be on the aid sheet, I will be taking requests. If you declare car 200, do you need to free it? No, in fact, you cannot free it. So you can only free something that was allocated with malloc. If you try to free an array, the program is quite likely to crash. It's undefined behavior, so it's not guaranteed to crash, but it's quite likely to crash. So yeah, so I think I'll put in so kind of whatever we mentioned in lecture from string.h and stdlib.h, I can put in on the H sheet. Yeah. Yeah, like the solutions, I believe the solutions are linked, aren't they? So the solutions from last year's notes for PyInteger are in here somewhere. If used, yeah, by the way, for the people who just joined, so I'm just answering a few questions now, and I'll start whatever, like the lecture in a second. So if you used strcpy, would you have to free? No. So free is associated with malloc. So if you malloc a block in memory, then you need to free it. strcpy is copying data from one area of memory to another area of memory. That's not necessarily at all associated with having to free. So for example, you might imagine a situation like this. So in main, you would say something like car str1 200, and we'll initialize it with like ABC, and you would say car str2 200, 300, whatever, and then you say strcpy, and you copy to str2 from str1. There is nothing you need or can free here. So you cannot free str1, you cannot free str2 because they weren't malloced, they're arrays to begin with. strcpy is just, in a way, you could equivalently say like str2 at 0 equals str1 at 0, and so on, right? So something like this. And that's the same in this instance as saying strcpy. And those are not to do directly with malloc or free. So if you said, so if you say something like car star A, and then you did strcpy, that's a good question. And then you said something like this, that would be undefined behavior. And that's because A is not initialized. So because A is not the address of anything in particular, that and undefined behavior means will probably crash, and that will probably crash. So without mallocing it, so if you had said something like, so if you had said something like that, that would be different, that you're allowed to do, and then you will need to free. But if you don't do this, then this is just undefined behavior. It's not to do with free or not free. It would crash before you have a chance to free. So the job of scanf, and we haven't actually done scanf in lecture, so you don't need to know it necessarily. So the job of scanf is, you are right to say that it's kind of similar. So scanf reads from input, and the job of scanf is to put whatever you enter on the keyboard into A. So in a way, it's kind of similar to this. So yes, it's kind of the same. Well, you could say that it's kind of analogous to strcpy, if that answered the question. All right. So, okay. All right. So what I want to do now is I want to go through last year's midterm and kind of do some solutions, and feel free to stop me if you want me to elaborate on anything. But basically, I want to go through those questions and say, okay, like, this is how you would do it if you were doing the midterm. This is how you would connect the questions to the material from before. And that will hopefully help you in terms of studying for the midterm. So I think kind of in terms of the coverage, naturally people ask. So the answer is everything up until, everything up until Friday before reading week. So this lecture is not going to introduce any new material. It's just going to be about reinforcing material from before. So technically, in terms of coverage, it doesn't change. Of course, the more you practice, or like if you listen to this lecture, hopefully it will be helpful, but it would be helpful because it's like a review, it's reinforcement material from before, not because I'm going to say anything new. So in terms of how I'm selecting questions, so I basically look at what we've done in lectures. I look at what we've done in labs. I look at what we've done for the project. So the project is very much included, of course. And then I say, usually what I say is, what would be a reasonable question to ask, given that that's what was in lecture, that's what was in lab, that's what was on the project. And that's the case for most questions. Then, as is the case with pi integer last year, we'll get into it a little bit more in depth later. I say, well, like, what can I ask that can be quite challenging, but that is doable with the tools that people had from the course? And, one or two questions are like that. So that's kind of the overall plan. I think the best way to see how that's implemented is to look at previous midterms and see if that makes sense to you. And that's kind of what I want to do together with you today. So I'll try to answer questions as I go. So Leo says, in order to set str1 to ABC, does it work because it is initialized with 200? No, so either way is fine. So here, what this says is that str1 is an address of an array of 200 cars. So if I left this out, so if I said something like this, that would still work. It's just that str1 would automatically be set to however much you need here. So here you need 4 because A, B, C, and then an L. So that would be of 4 cars. So that would be the difference. So you can say str1 at whatever 34 is something. That is actually fine. But you cannot say str3 at 34 because, yes. Will the midterm layout be similar to 2023, like typographically, I guess, kind of quite similar. So like I said before, there would be more short questions a little bit, but otherwise, yes. Oops. Will the questions be graded in style? No. Reading files. Okay, so if I forget, please ask me again later. So I will do that towards the end. That's okay. Can you go over how to access an array passed to a function? Yes, we'll do that. Okay. All right. So I'll go to the midterm. So, and I'll just go through the questions one by one. So the first question is actually last year as well, and this year as well, we did do this just outright in lecture. So what's going on here? So we have our linked list, and we have a specific way in which this linked list is defined. So there can be some variation there, but not very much. So one difference between what you see here and what we did in class is that, and actually last year I had done this kind of thing in class as well. This year I hadn't, is you have two structures. So one structure that contains the head and the size of the linked list. So that would be similar to how for lab 4 you did array lists, where you had a pointer to the block of memory and you had the size. And then a separate struct that's the node. Okay, so in a picture, that would look kind of like this. So you have your head, and then the head points to N1, and 1 points to N2, and 2 points to N3, and so on. And then the last node points to null. But in this case, you don't need it because in the head, you would say that the size is equal to k, whatever k is. So that is the structure of the linked list. So the goal of append is to say, well, in general, if this is the structure of the linked list, you want to add another element. So you want to add element k plus 1 over here. And then as a result, you also want to change this. All right, so that's the goal. So let me pull the actual thing. So that's like this. And we want to append to this, right? So my list has a head and my list has size. So, okay. So here, kind of the usual thing that would happen is exactly the same as what we've done in lecture, which is you need to just walk to N1, then to N2, and so on, up to Nk, and then append this guy at the end, right? So, and I'll initially start with just that. So I'll say, okay, so node current. Well, I'll make the new node, I guess. And then I'll say, okay, so new node data is going to be the new element. And this is actually not correct. So now what I want to do is I want to walk through the structure. So I want to walk to N1, N2, and so on up until I find the NK. And then after NK, I want to append the new node. So I'll have the current. And initially, that would be the head, right? So head stores this guy, right? So the address of N1. And now I need to go to the NK. So I actually know the size. So I can just say, all right, so I need to make K steps in order to get to NK, right? So the first step already made. So I'll say 4 and I equals 1 because I already have stepped to N1. And I is smaller than size. I update current to current next. And now current is NK. So I'll just say current next is new node. And new node next is null because that's now the last node. And I need to update the size. So mylist size plus plus. So one issue here is that I actually neglected to consider one case, right? So one case is that the size is 0. If the size is 0, then mylist head is going to be null, and that's not going to work, right? So I can just do it as a special case. I can say if the size is null, 0, sorry, then what I want to do is I want to set the head to just be the new node. So here I kind of am doing new node next equals null either way, so I can just move it up front to over here. I'm also doing mylist size plus plus twice, so which is fine. Like someone asked, like you don't really need to kind of worry about style when you're writing, and like it's easier for me to move around lines than it is for you when you're doing it with a pencil and paper. But we'll still do it, so we'll move it to over here. So because I moved it to over here, here it should be -1 actually, because now size has been already incremented. So that's kind of like that. So in terms of how do you study for this kind of question? Well, like really you would look, and we had done fewer examples with linked list this year than we had done before last year's midterm. So some people asked, like, are linked lists on the midterm at all? And the answer is, well, we had done linked lists, just like not as much. So you would probably expect somewhat fewer questions that are related to linked lists. But how do you study for something like this? Well, like first, you just need the basic idea for how do you define a linked list. So you would need to understand especially this kind of structure where you store kind of chunks in the linked list that are like data and then the address of the next node. Then you need to understand this idea that you can walk through the linked list. So this component, and that's from lecture, is really important, where you just say, I'll define current, which is an address of a node, and I'll just keep updating current. So again, I think this is counterintuitive when you see first. So current is of type node star, right? So what we're saying here is current equals current next, and that makes sense. There's no stars that you need because current next is of type node star, and also current is of type node star. So you just assign current next to current. All right. So kind of as you're reviewing, like if you see this kind of algorithm, and maybe it's already obvious to you, but it always makes sense to ask, okay, like, can I conceptualize it in general, like what's going on here? And my answer in this case is, well, what's going on is we're walking through this list, right? So we're working from N1 to N2 to N3 and so on. And then the other question to ask yourself is, do I understand the details of the syntax? So in this case, do I see why it is that there is a star here, but there is no stars here? And again, the answer is, well, like current is of type node star, and then current is always an address of a node. Current next is an address of a node. Current is an address of a node, so you can just put current next in current. Is that making sense to people? Questions? All right. So we need to take a brief pause for me to find a power outlet. So forgive me for 2 minutes while I'm gonna run around and try to find a power outlet. We'll resume in about hopefully 2 minutes. Good news, I have found the power outlet. I'll be there in 30 seconds. All right. All right, we're back. So that's this question. So the next question is kind of like the lab. So I believe that in the lab we had strcpy recursive, and here we have strcat recursive. So I'll just quickly do this question. So what are we trying to do here? So we have best, that's like whatever. So I'll write it as an array because that I think is just like clearer. So it's kind of like this with the question marks just indicating that it's something, it doesn't matter what's after the null. And then SRC would be, yeah, something like this. So like whatever, FG, and then null, and then again, doesn't matter what's at the end. So the goal for strcat is to append FG to ABC over here, right? So how do we do this? So this one was actually slightly tricky, right? So what you need to figure out is, okay, like how do I kind of update dest in such a way that I keep going, right? And you cannot do it like this. So you cannot say, well, I'll first just put the F over here. And the reason you cannot do this is because you don't know if F is the last character. And if it is, then you forgot to put the null at the end. So the trick, and that's kind of like the problem-solving aspect here, is to say, well, what I'll do is I'll copy F, and then I'll copy G, and so on. And every time I copy one character, I'll just move the null one space to the right. Right? So what you want to do is you want to put the F here, and then you will want to put the G here, and then you're done. So that's kind of the high level of what you want to happen. So then the question is, okay, how do you make it so that it's a recursive step? So how do you make this problem kind of solved a little bit and then solvable using a recursive call to strcat? So here's an idea. You would say, okay, so I'll copy copy src0 to the end of dest. And then I'll copy, and I'll write it in like Pythonish notation, src1 to the end of dest. And that you can do with strcat. Right? Because this call, like that's what it says, is copy the string that starts at src plus 1. So if src is this, then copy this guy to the end of dest. Like that's what it does. Right? So, okay. So that's the overall idea. So now we also want the base case. So what's the base case here? So if src0 is just already null, we can just return dest. So strcat has two jobs, right? So strcat both appends src to dest. It also just returns dest, which is like, it always returns dests, right? So that doesn't change. So, okay. So with that, we can do it, right? So we'll say, okay, so if src0 is null, then there's nothing that you need to do, just return dest. So else so here we'll start with this. So else the idea is, well, just put, so this is actually not quite correct. So we'll start with this. So we'll say dest at strlen dest is just src0. Then we also need to say, in case that this is the last thing that happens, we also want to make sure that there is a null at the end of dest. So we'll say dest strlen dest plus 1 is definitely not, is equal to null. And at this point, we just say, okay, now just call strcat dest src plus 1. Most of what's happening is that src plus 1 is going to get copied into dest. So we already copied the F to the end, and now we just want to copy G, well, and whatever is the rest of src to the end of dest. And then strcat rec always returns dest. Okay, so that's kind of the first draft, and that would have gotten you most of the points. Sorry, just one sec. So the problem with this is that this doesn't actually answer the question, right? Because the question says you must use recursion and you must not use helper functions or header files. And here we actually have used strlen as the helper, right? So, okay. How do we solve this so that we don't need strlen, so that we don't need strlen vest? So basically, what we need to do is we need to say, okay, this would work if dest were really short, right? So if dest were definitely empty, for example, then this would be just strcat. So what we want to do is we want to say, okay, like if we are here, then that works. If we're not in the base case, then we also just want to keep advancing dest until dest is empty. So we want to say, so if dest is 0 is not null, then we'll just return str. And you'll notice that this is a question that's like difficult enough that Copilot messes it up. And it messed it up again. So that would be like this. So what we're saying is that if dest is not null, so if dest has stuff in front of it, I'm just going to say, well, like just copy src to the end of this guy. And then if this guy is, again, not just the empty string, I'm saying, well, just copy src to the end of this guy. And then this is still not null. So now I'm saying, well, just copy src to the end of this guy. And copying src to the end of this guy, we can actually do in the old way. Right? So we keep advancing dest here by 1. The other problem is strcat always just returns whatever you send it. So here you're sending like here you're sending dest plus 1. So here I want to say -1 again, so that we return the original dest rather than the dest plus 1 that strcat returns. So okay. So that's like that. So on the other hand, if it is, then we'll copy src0 to dest0, and we'll return So here we need one more thing, which is we need to make sure that dest at 1 is now null as well, so that the next time we check if dest0 is null, it will be null. And at this point, we're done. So my problem-solving process here was, first, I kind of figured out what to do that's similar to strcpy from the lab. So that part, I think, wasn't hard. Then I noticed, oh, I'm not supposed to use helper functions. And here, and like to be honest, this question was more difficult than it should have been. But then, okay, so I did my usual thing where I said, okay, like I'll do whatever we did in class that's similar to strcpy. I think that's like moderately difficult, but if you think about it, you'll get there. And then I had the problem of, oh, like I am not allowed to use helper functions and I'm not allowed to use loops. So I could not use strlen. So at that point, this was one of the problems that did have the problem solving component of, okay, like how do I do that? And the answer was, well, we'll use the idea from before where essentially we do this kind of call usually, by the way, -1. So we do this kind of call usually, but what I'll do is I'll say, well, appending src to the end of this dest is the same as appending this src to the end of just this dest. And that's the same as appending src to the end of this dest. And that's the same as appending src just to the empty string over here. And appending src to the empty string is actually doable. So this is this trick where if dest is not the empty string, I'll just call strcat with dest +1 until dest becomes the empty string. And then I append src to the end of dest when dest is just the address of this null. I see there's a lot of stuff in the chat, so let me check what's going on. Okay, so carstar, so yeah, no loop. Why is there -1? So the reason is that what strcat does, sorry. So what strcat is supposed to do is return dest. If you send strcat dest +1, it'll return dest +1, but I want to return dest. So for that reason, I'll just say, well, this returns dest +1. Well, I want to return dest, so I just -1 it. The other option that's like arguably less fancy is to just say, and like that's the same. So you would just say like strcat this, and then just return dest. That's the same. It's just like 2 lines instead of 1. All right. So this is one of those. I received a new emoji. Install emoji library to view it. Okay, later. Okay, so I thought I had the poop emoji installed. Okay. Okay, anyway, so that's this. And again, like this was like a combination of the strcpy, the recursive version that we had in the lab, but with a problem-solving component for sure, and it wasn't an easy question. So okay, all right. So this is Q3. So basically, yeah, it was like the ruse, I guess. That year, I think the midterm happened a little bit later. Maybe I'm not sure. So anyway, so this question is basically asking for a mini version of project 1, right? So it's saying you have this kind of file format. So the file format is you have a phone number, tab, and then you have the company name. And it's asking you to just read in this data, right? So I think what we're asking for So I think what we're asking for here is, so the data would be a contiguous block of struct businesses. And we just want to read in this stuff. And like for project one, so I think some people are using strtok, and like it's fine if that's what you want to do. I don't recommend it. I kind of recommended against it on the midterm as well. Didn't teach it last year either. Really, and like that's the case with the project, and that would be the case with a question like that if it comes up on the midterm this year. It's easier to think about just like how do I do it with a while loop than to do something fancy. Okay. So what I'm going to do, so I think kind of I'll just solve this question, and maybe for the people who are still working on project one, that maybe would in itself as well be helpful. And then I'll, to the extent possible, because I think not everyone has done the project yet, I'll talk about the connection to the project, although I think it's kind of obvious as well. So we have this structure, and we have a phone number that's 10 digits, and we have the name, and we have a read numbers that has the file name, has a pointer to business. So basically, the first thing that we wanted, so basically, and then the size I think is inside of here, right? So inside of business. Let me just also copy the format here. Okay, so the plan would be so that's like this. So, all right. So we'll open the file name like this. So error checking in general, unless we explicitly ask for it, is not required. That particular thing, I don't think we even covered. So it would be the case that if the file name doesn't exist, then file would be null, and then you would have an error. So I'll do a line like this. So one thing that's technically true here, although like we didn't actually enforce, so we did actually enforce it. So it's that you may not assume the maximum size of a business name. So that creates a problem because you don't know what the maximum size of the line would be, right? So let me, and this is like one of those things that people were unhappy about, and I'm actually in retrospect also unhappy about that. So let me first ignore that and just read things line by line without worrying about the fact that I don't know what the maximum size of the line is. So I'll just assume that the line is like not larger than 1000 or whatever. And then I'll get the line and I'll get the size like this. So if the size is in the line, that's the only thing there. I can just say ATOI and convert the line, which is an integer, to a size. At this point, I can malloc the block. So here, the reason this is business star star is I want to be able to call it from the main function, kind of like this, right? So I would say business white pages, and initially white pages is just some address, not any particular address. And then I'm giving the address of white pages, and inside of read numbers, I'm setting star white pages to something, right? In the same way that here it's in size, I'm setting in the pointer to size so that it can say star size is something. So, okay. So that's like that. And now I'll just go line by line. So that would be like this. And I'll get the line. So here, in fact, I need to say 999 because, or like, let me say 1000, but I'll give this one here because I also need space for the null at the end. And well, Copilot wants to do strtok. I don't want to do strtok. I just want to read in the digits. So I know how many digits there are. So it's really not difficult, right? So I'll just say, int j, and I'll say for, how should we do it? Let's do it like that. So we'll just go until line J is not a tab. And here I'll just say if it's not a dash. So if line J is not a dash, then this is like that. So that's something from the lab, right? So you can get the digit like this. And then we just go J++. So sorry, so J, so this would be, so we need another one. So this would be JK. And this would be K. And this would be K++. And then J++ would go over here. So the idea is we're advancing in the line, whatever we do. And if it happens that line J is not the dash, then we fill in the K digit. And then the next time we do the digit, that's the next K, and so on. Does that make sense? Questions?
I don't think you initialize k equals to 0.
That is true. All right. So that's like this. So what does line 26 do? So line 26 makes it so basically we start out, sorry, laptop is having issues. Oh, that's because of the save as. So basically we start with a pointer to a block of structs, right? So this is business star white pages. So this is like a block of structs, so like an array, but a block. And then we want for this to actually be a valid block. We don't know ahead of time what the size of the block is supposed to be. So what we're doing here is we read in the size. So here we read in the 3. So that's like what you have in project 1. And then we say, okay, star white pages. So over here, this would be just white pages, is malloc to be this block of this many structs of this size. Let me open the chat again. Sorry, so, we were asking about line 26, right? So line 26 is, so we got the line, so sorry about that. So the line initially was just, for example, 3. And then ATOI converted the string 3 to the number 3. So it's converting a string, not a character, to an integer. Can you do ATOI line J? Can't, because character rather than a pointer to a character to ATOI. You cannot fix it by saying address of either, because it needs to be null terminated. So like there is a way to avoid case. So like you can do like I don't necessarily recommend it, but you can like keep a pointer to the current character and phone number, but then it would have to be separate from phone number, which has to be like the initial one. You could, in principle, I do not recommend it. I won't even type it in. You could, in principle, like keep advancing the pointer phone number, and then at the end do phone number equals phone number minus 10, because 10 digits. But that would like, okay, it would help you not define K, but it would make the code a lot less clear. Does that make sense? Yes. So yeah, like those are separate things, right? So this ATOI is just for reading in the 3. And then we manually read in digits like this using the while loop. Does that make sense? Do you have to set K to 0 again? Well, yeah, like you have to set K to 0 again every time, which we do. So not every time after J++, because here we're just reading. So like we're like reading in like one single line. So we start with like J equals 0, K equals 0, and then 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, j is 4, k is still 3, and so on. Does that make sense? No, you can't, because ATOI takes a string rather than a character. So line J is a character, it's not a string. No, I just mean that, like, sorry, forget what I was saying. So I think what you're referring to is so like there is this kind of thing which only happens the once, and that's like how many lines are there going to be. And then we separately read in this number using the while loop. Line 31. Well, so it's like a tab, not a space, but yes. So like basically I'm saying we're going through this guy, and like here it's like j equals 0, j equals 1, j equals 2, and we keep going until we encounter the tab here. Yeah, so Oliver's answer is correct, right? So what we want to do is so in this setting, it's like the digits are ints. So in order to go from the digit 9 to the number 9, something like this, what we need to do is we need to just say 9 minus 0, and that's because the ASCII value of 9 minus the ASCII value of 0 is just 9, the number. Alice, sorry, I don't really understand this question. So Lucia, I think what you're asking is, do you need to know any particular ASCII value for anything in particular? And the answer is no. The order, well, I mean, like the only thing is like what you had in the lab is that you know that the digits are all stored in order, right? So like the ASCII value for 0 is ASCII value for 1 minus 1. This is also true for letters. You technically, I suppose, don't need to know that. Why is the for loop? So why do we repeat? Well, because like this 3 means that here come 3 lines, right? So it says what the size of the file is in terms of how many entries there are in this file. All right. Yeah. Right. So technically, so like this is like, yeah, like the midterm was like a little bit more difficult than I had intended. So technically, we also said that you don't get to assume the number of entries in the file. So for that reason, technically, and I actually set it up so that people got bonus marks for this last time. Of course, like this time I'm telling you how to do it. So technically, it's like more fair to ask. So what people technically would need to do is write their own get line, which gets around the idea of having to preset how many characters there would be in a line, right? So over here, I just said like the line is at most 1,001 characters because the name of the business is technically unlimited. Couldn't do it because like if the business doesn't fit into the 1,000 characters, you'd never know. So this is how this is kind of one way to do it, is you just say, okay, and this is like a quite hacky way of doing it, but it does the job. So I'm just saying, like, figure out how many characters there are in total in general. And then once you know that, just read in this many characters every time, right? So here I'm saying, okay, I want to get line number index from the file, right? And star dest would be where I'm reading things in, and I'll malloc the appropriate amount of space for star dest. And this is just the file name, right? So what I'm doing is I like repeatedly read in the file until it's the case that I've read in the entire file, and then I know how many characters there are in the file in total, right? So I open the file, I say skip the first index 1 line. So that's done like this, right? So I just keep using I keep using fgetS. And then I say, okay, so I've skipped. I get my my string star dest, and currently I'm allocating current length for it. Then so now that it's reallocated, I use fgetS, and I say, okay, I'm done. And I keep doing it while it's not the case that I manage to read in a new line at the end. So if there is not a new line at the end of dest, that means that I didn't read dest to the end. All right, so doing that, I don't know that anyone actually did this on the midterm. I think maybe a few people, but that is like one way to figure it out, right? So the idea is I write one function that skips n lines, and then I keep reading in the current line, so the line at this index, and I keep doing it again and again, and I keep reallocating until I've allocated enough and read in enough of that line that there is a new line at the end. Because remember, what fgetS does is it reads in this many characters. So if it read in this many characters, but still hasn't managed to read in the new line, I have not realloced enough. So then I reallocate again, and I keep reallocating until I get the full thing. All right, I'll go to the chat. Can you just iterate from after the tab to the new line and use that number in the realloc? Yeah, I mean, so the question is, what are you iterating in? So fgetS is kind of gets the whole thing until the new line or until the size that you gave it. So I wanted to use fgetS. If you go character by character, yeah, you could do that. So you cannot then realloc. You might need to realloc in real time, but yes, like that's also possible. So car star const changing individual elements of the car array does not allow changing the address. That is correct. Car try to modify the individual element, and it gives a segfault. So that's because the right hand side quotes ABC, that's of type const car star, right? So if you remember, you cannot modify literals. So what's happening for you is you are casting implicitly const car star to char star const, but it doesn't mean that. So that means that the compiler is not going to complain when you try to say h at 1 equals quote d quote, but it's still undefined behavior because the right-hand side was const char star. And in fact, the reason it was const char star is that in C, you cannot modify the contents of a string literal. So you made it so that the compiler will allow you to do it, but then it crashes when you run it. So that makes sense. What does fgetS line 0 fp in first function do? That is correct. Yeah, so it just skips the line. So it says like read in 0 characters into the line and go to the next one. Yes, so do while loops always just run the once. Sorry, so I haven't actually done do while in class. So yes, so like do while is like you first do this and then you check whether this is true or not. So it's always the case that this runs at least once. All right. So that is this. So the next question, I think, was pretty easy. So the next question was like quite similar to the project. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so it's just like more efficient that way, arguably, but yeah, like you could also like increment by 1 every time. It's just that it would take more time if you like reallocate every time. So here you just want to free the numbers. So I'll do it for the version that I wrote here. So like you read numbers and then you want to free them. So here I oh, sorry. So I actually did not finish reading in the names. So let me read in the names. So here I'll malloc just 1000 for the business name. And then I'll strcpy this way, right? So here what's going on is the business name starts at line plus j plus 1, right? Because j kept incrementing until j has become the tab, and then the business name starts at line plus j plus 1. So by the way, please stop me if it's not clear, right? And then I'm just saying copy to dot name this thing. So I'm giving it, for example, the address of the S, and I'm saying copy that to dot name. So why dot name? Well, because this is the ith struct, and then dot name would be the pointer, right? Which I just allocated. So that's of type char star. So now if I want to free the whole thing, what do I need to do? I need to free the names, and then I also need to free the entire structure. So the names were malloced separately, so they need to be freed separately. No, so you could. So those are options that exist, right? So like you could say that the business name is like an array of like 200 or something, and then you would not free that. Now, in this particular question, you couldn't really do it as an array because you didn't know in advance what was the size of the array that you need. But here I kind of fudged it anyway because I said like, well, it's at most 1000. So in that sense, you could redefine the struct to have an array like this instead of a char star. Yes, you can do strcpy because like, so you can do strcpy between any kind of strings as long as you're allowed to write into this guy. So if it's a character array, you can write to it. So here I'll say, okay, so int I, and I'll free all the names. So for every white page is I, for every I free the name because I malloced it before. And once I have freed those, then I can free the block white pages. Make sense? No, it cannot. So that's a good question. So so those are different things. So the question here is like this. So this is the same as star white plus number. And then, so this is like white num. And then you're saying, I'll star that. And I'll do dot name. So this num, this. So this is this. On the other hand, this, so again, we just expand it. So this is star white plus number, and then star. And then dot name. So the difference is, are you doing white plus number or are you doing star white plus number? And those are extremely difficult. Different, sorry, also difficult, right? So because like white is one address and star white is a completely different address. It's like the address that's stored at address white. So one or the other makes sense, but it can't be that both make sense because star white and white are completely different addresses. And it's a question of, do you want to add number to star white or do you want to add number to white? All right. It's all right. So that's like this. So I think I promised pointers, so we'll do pointers. So here we have something that's kind of out of the pointers exercises, essentially. So we're saying we have this struct. So it says struct daylight. And here it says, okay, so we want a block of memory that has n/2 pointers to struct daylight. And then we want to set it to this. So let me copy it. So here, create a block of memory that contains n/2 pointers. So that means that we want to here say star block is this, right? So, by the way, what's the name of the struct? So this is going to be a block of pointers. So that means so we want the address of the first element, but the first element itself is a pointer, so that's why it's a pointer to a pointer. And then there's n over 2 of those, and each one of them is a pointer. So it's size of daylight star, because there's there's n over 2 addresses, right? So the picture here would be kind of like this. It would be like one address, so I'll do decimals. So like address 1000, address 1200, address 14,000, address 16, and so on. So that's the block. And then at location 1000, we'll have the actual daylight thing. So like whatever, like 1234. And then at location this will have like whatever, like 1120. And at location 1400 we'll have, sure, like 1031 or something like that. Right? So that's the picture. We have a block of addresses, so a block of pointers, and then at those addresses we have the actual times. This is a pointer to a pointer because I want for this function to actually do something, which means that I need to say star block equals to something. Because if I just say block equals to something, that's just changing a local variable. So that means that I want to pass the address of the block here, and then on the left-hand side, this would be star block, and that has an effect outside the function. So then we just need to set it to something. So here we want to allocate block I. So initially this is just a block with like random numbers, and then we want to say make this be an address where it can actually store daylight. So that's what's going on here. I'm saying block a star block at I. So star block is like everything is star block because star block is the block that's outside the function. And then I am getting an address of a struct daylight, like this. And then this is a pointer. So to get to the field, it's arrow hours. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's like that. So for part B, the day length in Toronto, 11:29 minutes, whatever. So write code which uses create daylight point block to store the day length of the 2 days. So this is like in a way like an easier question than part A. The reason it was there is just kind of so that like if you got part A slightly wrong, then at least in part B, you can show how it is that you meant for part A to work. So like we looked at whether you were basically consistent for this, right? So this would be like, sorry, I forgot the numbers. So just copy the entire thing. So the main you didn't have to do. So here we just, so Copilot is right. So we just create this data. So like 11:29, 12:09, and then we create this block. So, oh, it didn't actually get it completely right. So this would be like daylight block like this. Oh, sorry. So this would be like so, right? So one thing to notice here is I actually forgot one of the stars here. So this makes sense because star block should be of type daylight star star. So that means that the block itself needs to be daylight star star star. So here we create block that's daylight star star. So that's a pointer to a block of pointers. And then we send the address of block to create daylight point block. Does that make sense? All right. So write code that prints out the number of hours in the second element of the block. So that is indeed just this, right? So that's already been kind of done over here as well. All right, so how do you do this? Well, do the pointer exercises. So this is basically like a reskinned version of one of the pointer exercises. How to get at this? Again, kind of think logically about like what this says. So it says n over 2 pointers to struct daylight. So each element would be of type daylight star. So that means that the address of the first element would be of type daylight star star. And that means that if you want to be able to modify it, that must be of type daylight star star star. Like it's a bit much, like right? So it must be that you're modifying star block. Star block is of type daylight star star. So this is type daylight star star. And then you think back to, okay, what do I need to do? I need to create a block of n over 2 of pointers to daylight. So this is the size of the block that you need to create. All right. So I also want to answer questions. So we actually had done pi integer in class this year. So in terms of making conclusions about how do I get this kind of question, well, if you remember the discussion about pi integer from class, actually it was just an extension of the kind of thinking that we used in order to create array lists, right? So it wasn't an easy question at all on the midterm, but like what kind of thinking that you need there? Well, you would say, okay, what's a pi integer? Well, it's a bunch of digits and I need to store an arbitrary number of digits. Well, that's like storing an arbitrary number of elements in array lists. So I'll just adapt the code from array list to pi integer. So in terms of kind of successfully studying for that kind of thing, what did you need to do? Well, I would say the only thing that anyone could do for that is make sure that they knew how to do array list from scratch. All right, so I think I promised a bunch of answers to people in the chat. So what I'd like to ask, and I'm sorry about that, but if you could like copy and paste your question again so that they can answer it. Well, so Mahika is actually not exactly correct in the sense that it's true that if you don't cast, you'll just get a warning. So in that sense, it's fine, but you don't already know that that the malloc returns anything in particular, because malloc does not return a particular kind of pointer. So it gets a size of, but the size of just converts to a number. So malloc does not know the type of the block that it returns. Will there be Python questions on the midterm? So we had one lecture where there was Python content, and at the time I said that it would be on the midterm, and or potentially, and I'm not going back on that. At the same time, we did not do Python syntax in this course. So that means that I cannot grade you on Python syntax, but I can grade you on kind of whatever concepts that there had been in the first lecture. Yeah. Will there get a similar long question this year? So are you asking like similar question or similarly long question? And the answer to similar question is, I don't know. Similarly long, I will try to keep them shorter. I think last year I overdid it in terms of the length of the question. Well, again, like similar questions or similarly long questions. Anyway, okay, so okay. Yeah, so I promised, I think an hour and a half ago that I would make a reference sheet and I would post it. Okay, so let me scroll up. So what's the difference between car star and car open close? So that's an interesting question, because sometimes the answer is that there is no difference. So here's a context where, so here are kind of both situations. So if you're doing something like this, well, let me. So here there is a difference between A and B. So one, A needs to be freed and B cannot be freed. To return A makes sense, can access A0 outside the function. Return B does not make sense, because you cannot access B0 outside the function. So those are kind of the differences. Like the third one is size of A is just fixed. And then size of B is the size of the array. So inside a function, it's like that. On the other hand, what you literally asked might have been different, because if you're saying void F car A, and you're saying void G car B, those are exactly the same. So this is just syntactic sugar for this. There is no difference at all. So inside the function, there is quite a bit of difference between defining a car star A and a car B open brace, close brace, because one is an array. So this is an array, and this is pointer to a block. And they're different. Over here, and that's unfortunate, but that's the C programming language. Those are just exactly the same, and specifically both mean this. Okay. Okay, so basics of reading files. So the only way in which we read files in this class is with fgetS. And what fgetS, and that's how you should do it. And what fgetS does is it gets an entire line from a file, right? So the only thing that we know from this class is you open a file for reading like this, and then you can go through the file using right as well. So you go through, so fgetS reads in at most 200 characters and at most one line from the file. So line is the first line of the file, then the second line of the file, the third line of the file, and so on. And you're limiting this should be 199, and you're limiting this to reading 199 characters into the line. If there's anything else, that gets cut off. So that's the only thing that we do in this class in terms of reading files. In terms of skipping tabs and stuff like that, you just do it with while loops, right? So like you just treat line as a bunch of characters, and you just, like if you want to skip spaces or something, you just say, like line is whatever. And if you want to, for example, you would say like whatever, like something like this, right? So you say like, if line is not a space, then you print. If it's a space, you don't do anything, and then you advance one by one. So that's like the only, so like there's nothing special about files. We just know how to read things line by line. Which one is a const that you cannot modify? Again, well, like there is a whole thing. So like if you go back to the slides, so const car C means cannot modify C at I, and car const D cannot modify D, but can modify DI. So passing arrays to functions. Just one second. A string and a car star are the same. So if I have an array over here, so that's a good example. Let's say we want to, so don't we write it like this? So I'll just do this example and then I'll explain. So something like this. So whenever you use an array, that gets converted to a pointer, right? So this guy, array, is the address of the one over here. right? So you're passing the array here. So here array is just the address of the first element. And then array at 0, that's the actual first element. Remember, like star array is the same as array at 0. Right? So in a way, it's kind of like works kind of like in Python, except like the mechanism behind it is different, right? So array gets passed to here. So you can say int array open close, that's exactly the same. It's still this. And then to access elements of the array, you just say array at I over here. Right. And that's because addresses work with square brackets in C like this, right? So in general, star array plus I is the same as array at I. So you can, for example, modify an array like this, right? So clear means like set everything to 0. So in the same way that you can print array at I, you can also set array at I to 0, right? So, and if you go to address array and modify the value at address array to 0, well, that of course has an effect outside the function as well. So that's kind of the basics of it. Like that's how, so arrays work kind of big picture. It looks like it works the same way as in Python. Now, behind the scenes, what actually happens is you're passing this array and it becomes the address of the first element. But then array at 0 is the same as saying star array. So at the end of the day, it's like behind the scenes, array is the address of the first element, but array at 0 becomes the value of the first element because array at 0 is the same as star array. All right, so in a way, that's all there is to it. But let's do another example. So let's say that you have an array of car stars, right? So here what I'm doing is I'm saying array 2, well, so like that's a block, but you know, so it's a block of pointers to car. And in a way, it's quite similar to this, right? So it's just that now it's addresses. And now I can say, okay, so let's say that array 2 at 0, I can just say, okay, that's hello. So what does that do? It makes it so that the first element of array 2, whatever, it becomes an address. And then at address 12,000, we happen to have hello, right? And then I can say like array 2 at 1 is whatever world. And then that means that if world is stored at 1400, then that would be like this. Okay. So then I can go and say, okay, so I want to modify array 2. So array 2 would be like this. And again, like this looks the same as this. And that's because it's the same. It's just that array 2 happens to be an array of car stars, whereas array happens to be an array of ints. So this star indicates that actually I'm passing the address of the first element of array. in the same way that this star indicates that I'm passing the first element of array 2, and then the type of the element is char star. In this case, the type of the element is int in this case. But this will look the same as this, because in both cases, what I'm doing is I'm modifying the first element. Do we need to declare? Do we need to say the type every time we malloc something? And do we need to declare type when we do malloc type struct mail? C does not automate, so you need to cast every time, yes. Can we do star line plus j to access caret line of j? Yes, star line plus j is exactly the same as line of j. It doesn't matter that it's car or anything like that. Star line, just line at j is just syntactic sugar for star line plus j. If I have a variable named block, can you explain when to use star block, star star block, star 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 block when defining a function? How do you determine? I would push back against this question, because if you have a variable named block, then, well, presumably you know what's supposed to be in there. So, and depending on what's in there, you would do different things. So let me go back to the example. So here we would start by saying, okay, what is block? Block, and that's just kind of the problem setting. Block in this case is a block of pointers to daylight, right? So a block of pointers to daylight means that every element is of type daylight star. And then this star is because it's a block. So we are storing the address of the first element. So that's why the type of block in this case is daylight star star. And then if inside this function, create daylight point block, we want to be able to modify this guy, then it must be that we're sending the address of this guy to the function. So if you're sending the address of block to this function, then it must be that over here, it's of type star star star, right? Because it's an address of a daylight star star. So I guess to answer your question, in this particular case, the way I knew this is daylight star star is because it's a block of daylight stars. That's what the problem says. And then the way I knew that this is daylight star 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 is because I must send the address of block in order to be able to modify block. And the type of the address of block is daylight star 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 because the type of block is daylight star star. Now here, why is the star block? Well, because I want to modify this guy. So I send the address of this guy. So that means that to modify this guy over here, I need to modify star block over here. So the analogy is with kind of the simpler case of like if you want to modify an integer, you send in the address of the integer and you say, go to that address and set it to 5. And then you call it using something like this. All right, so for Q5, I implemented a function that loops over the places, added them individually, calculates the carried over values for each place. The time complexity was n places. Yeah, so, well, so if you remember from 180 and from life in general, so log 10 of a number, so log 10 of, for example, 10,000 is equal to 5, right? Sorry, 4. Right, so log is so log 10 of a decimal number is just basically the number of digits in that number. So that's the connection. All right. Other questions? All right. So I will drop by the lab. So I'm unfortunately still in Vancouver tomorrow, but I'll drop by the lab on Wednesday. I'll announce some of ours at some point before the midterm as well next week. And I will definitely see everyone bright and early on Thursday morning. See ya. Yeah, good luck.